Welcome everyone to the governance webinar on behalf of Basketball Victoria. My name's Trevor Newcombe and I'm the Basketball Development Officer for Basketball Victoria Country in the Greater Western Region. My wingman today is Dave Huxtable, the General Manager of Basketball Victoria Country. If you've got any questions during the webinar, put them through to Dave on a personal message and hopefully we can get to them at the end of the webinar. Today we're going to cover across a couple of topics. These topics have come across us as development officers over the last 6-7 weeks and they're all a bit fuzzy in this current climate. So we just thought we'd cover off on a couple. Firstly, the role of the board and the committee in this time. What changes? Is it the same? What do we need to know? Next is holding an AGM in the current climate. So whether it's electronically, remotely, how we go about it, do we still need to do it? And finally, the board induction program. This is something that the staff at Basketball Victoria and in particular the regional office have been working on. We're just going to put that out there and see what you think about it. So firstly, let's look at how the board's functioning at the moment. Basically, I want to mention at the start that the board's role really doesn't change that much from what it's been doing for the last 6 months. Granted, we don't have red versus green at 4:30 on court 1 with 2 referees. That's been the staple of our basketball for the last 50, 60, 100 years. We don't have that anymore. So everything else, though, remains the same. However, the board can continue to function in whichever way it can. It still must maintain the finances of the business and probably more so than ever before, especially with the lack of income coming in at the moment, needs to make sure that we keep our eyes on that. Also of importance here is to maintain contact with your stadium owner or your stadium manager. Very important in these times. When we get back to the return to basketball and actually get to dribble the ball on the court, we may find that the stadium owner, whether it be a school or a local government authority, may have a different idea to what we do as far as return to sport is. So make sure you keep that contact up. Of course, you should always be acting within the law, okay? And in this case, I want to point to your constitution, okay? It is your law for your committee or for your board. And finally, maintain the interests of your stakeholders. Now, we all know that our stakeholders include our players, our coaches, our referees, okay? But make sure, let's not forget our sponsors and our supporters as well, okay? I've seen a lot of really good work by our associations giving mega shout outs to their sponsors via social media. Remember, they're hurting as well. And in many cases, some of them may have just reopened their doors, probably as late as yesterday. So make sure, give them a boost, because from an association perspective, you want these sponsors on board next year, the year after, and ongoing. So make sure you give them a shout out. And finally, communication's the key at this time. Absolutely important. Basketball Victoria has been putting a lot of regular updates out, and it's good that I've seen them being shared right across the basketball community, which is fantastic. But let's not forget your staff as well, okay? Very important that you maintain contact and ensure that their health and well-being is being looked after. Make sure that you have a staff well-being as a line item on each of your committee meetings or your board meetings and check in with them regularly. Another hint here too, just to harbour on a point, don't necessarily ask them in a community setting, okay? Just make that phone call, ring them up, say good day, just check to see how they're going. So in summing up, maintain the status quo, we just haven't got the basketballs. The next item I want to discuss is about your annual general meetings. Do we have to run one? Well, yes, you do, okay? It's a requirement to run your AGM. However, there's been a bit of a dispensation from Consumer Affairs regarding your AGM. So you can actually defer your AGM and also the time to lodge your financial statements. This can be up to 3 months, okay? The thing is you must contact Consumer Affairs to do this, okay? So if your AGM's coming up and you don't feel confident about running one electronically, then get in contact with Consumer Affairs, get onto their website and they'll help you out. So the next question is, can we run an electronic AGM or a AGM remotely? Well, there's actually 3 answers here: yes, no, and maybe. The first place you need to look is your constitution, okay? If you're operating under the model rules, your constitution definitely has that you can run your AGM electronically, okay? You may have also had a provision in there if you've written your own rules, okay, if it's stated. Some constitutions, however, may specifically not allow AGMs to be run other than in person. And I've actually seen one of these, and the association has sought and been granted an extension by Consumer Affairs for their AGM. Brings me to the third option, the maybe, okay? The Constitution, and this usually happens if the Constitution is silent on the matter. So in other words, it doesn't mention it at all. This might be because the Constitution is old and electronics actually weren't invented when the Constitution was written. Yep, I've seen one of them ones. Or specifically that they just don't think of it when they rewrote their Constitution. The advice I've seen in relation to a silent Constitution is that you can run an electronic AGM if you really have to. In general, I'd guess that the regulators are not going to come down hard on any association that puts the health and well-being of their members first by delaying or shifting an AGM online, as long as you act in good faith. So that's the yes, no, and maybes. So you've decided to run your AGM, you're going to run it electronically. What do you do now? My first bit of advice, make sure you give yourself plenty of time, okay? If your notice requirement is 14 days, put your notice out a month before, okay? Make sure you give yourself plenty of time. Your constitution will be able to guide you on this as well as to what requirements you actually have. Another thing I'd recommend is that make sure you mention it's an AGM, an electronic AGM, and make sure you get RSVPs. That way you can send back the AGM papers, so the reports, any voting that's required, the agenda, and also the link to the meeting. Another tip here is, as well, if you get your RSVPs out, you make sure you've got a quorum. Nothing worse, had to do it myself. You're out in the hallway dragging people in because you haven't got a quorum for your AGM. So it's a good way of knowing that you've got some and that you don't have to go getting support. Also, spend a bit of time in making sure you have plenty of lead-in time, as I said. Remembering too that you may also be calling for nominations, okay, in your original notice. And you'll need time to look through this and how you're going to work this out with a new platform. It might also be worth spending a bit of time with your committee or your board and just having a couple of practice runs, okay, with the committee. You and your association may not have used online conferencing before or online communication platforms, and you never know, it may become the way of the future, the new norm that everybody talks about. So take a little bit of time, do a couple of practice runs. It can't hurt. So here we go. Things are all good. You've got a quorum, excellent, and the meeting time rolls around. First thing, make sure you know who's going to chair the meeting. Okay, very important. Okay, and make sure they have an agenda. Okay, stick to the agenda. The meeting will run a lot more smoother. Nothing really changes with an electronic AGM as a normal AGM. Okay, reports are still presented, positions are filled, the meeting's closed, everybody goes home. Magnificent. Preferably, you'll have no general business, okay, at the AGM. I know that this is up to the members, okay? It's their right to attend and be heard at an AGM. It's also their right under the Constitution to raise any general business and to be brought up at the AGM as they wish, as long as it's done within the timing and the specifications as listed in the Constitution. But if you can, try and defer it to either a committee meeting or a board meeting for further action. Again, communication's the key here. Make sure you communicate with your members. And lastly, you need to make sure that you have the ability to vote if you need to. I know that Zoom, which we use a lot for our meetings, Zoom definitely has that function. The easiest way is very similar to what we're doing here today. If you've got a question, private message it to Dave. Okay, the same can be done for voting at an AGM or voting at any meeting for that matter. You make somebody the returns officer, and if there is a vote that needs to be had, you just private message the returns officer. They can collate the data and announce the outcome of the voting. Well done, it's all over. The meeting's done. The AGM's been run and won. Make sure that you've kept meticulous notes, okay? And a great set of minutes. Make sure you mention that the AGM was electronic and why, okay? COVID-19 is going to cover a lot of stuff, particularly at the moment, okay? And why it happened. The minutes in these circumstances cannot be overstated, okay? Make sure you have good minutes, okay? Remember also too, safety trumps all, okay? The rules you operate under at the moment were made in a perfect world, okay? And in very different times. Right now, do what's safe, do what's right, and you can't go wrong. The next thing I want to touch on is board induction program. Mainly in the country office, we've been working on this for a while, and it's about a board induction program for association members. So what we're going to cover off on is what it is, why do you need it, when do we hold it, and so forth. So you've successfully run your AGM, okay, electronically probably, I would say, now that you know how to do that. And you've got a couple of new board or committee members that are coming on board. You'd like them to commence hitting the ground running and contributing to the effective running of your association. Rather than them just turning up on the first night, introducing themselves around, and then taking the first 5 or 6 meetings to get their head around everything that's happening, we've developed this board induction program for the associations. It allows new board members to be properly informed, supported, and welcomed after their initial appointment. Imagine you walk into a meeting, no idea what it's about, you don't know anyone, and you're meant to contribute to the happenings of the business, or in our case, the association. Okay, it's pretty daunting. This is what happens when board members turn up to their first board meeting. By bypassing this awkward first moment, we can ensure that new members are welcomed and they get to work immediately. Knowing the history of the association, the finances, the operations, the strategic direction, will all assist in the effective running of the association. Preferably the board induction should be held prior to the board's first meeting, okay? And should be attended by every member of the board. Now, this can be formal or informal. It might be just a informal get together, introduce everybody, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to work, or it can be a formal setting. Okay? Over time, state and federal laws may differ, governing bylaws may change, new directions, protocols, procedures might be introduced. So these things have all got to be explain to board members what happened last year may not be the same thing that happens this year. It's always good practice as well for the treasurer to explain their financial modelling, how they're going to present their spreadsheets to the board, how they're going to express their reports, and all that sort of stuff. That way, when they get to the meeting, everybody's on the same page. We know the money's in, we know the money's out. Good stuff from the treasurer. I've just listed here a couple of things that a new board member should be issued prior to their first board meeting. Their constitution, okay? It's the rules you operate under as an organisation. Absolutely, it should be handed out. Copy of the bylaws, financial situations, business plans, strategic plans if you have one, and some historical information for the association as well, such as past minutes of the AGMs, but also board meetings as well. All of this background information, absolutely priceless for the new board member coming on board. Also gives them a greater awareness of the role that they're going to have. It's also a good time at the board induction program to talk about the 4 attributes of a good board: board solidarity, board confidentiality, acting good faith, and conflict of interest. Board solidarity, once a decision's been made at a board level, you've got the chance to vote. The board all then unifies behind that decision. Regardless of how you personally voted, the board has decided on a course, and the course of action, and all board members should unite doing that. Board confidentiality, what happens in the 4 walls stays in the 4 walls. The only exception I'd say here is if the association decrees that it sends out the minutes of the meeting out to their members, and some associations do. If you do that, they may actually be edited minutes as well, because there are some things that happen at association meetings that don't go out to the general public. And offhand, I'm just thinking one off the top of my head, it might be fee relief for some players. So not everybody needs to know that information. Act in good faith. Fiduciary duty is the mainstay of any board. The duty to act in good faith and for the benefit of and the interests of the organisation that you are managing. It's not about your own personal interests. It's not about your own agenda or your own motives. It's about the association you've been appointed to represent. And lastly, conflict of interest. And I'll read this as a direct quote from the company directors program that I'm involved with. Occurs when a person who is part of the decision-making process is involved in which they or a family member stands to gain or benefit in some way. So that's pretty basic. Your association should have a policy around this and how it's dealt with at board meetings. The board induction program is a great way to ensure that all of your board members are on board and that they know those 4 attributes of a really good board. You keep those things front and centre at every board meeting and you can't go wrong. As I said before, act in good faith and you won't be questioned. I seem to have rushed through that, but it seems to have taken 20 minutes. Thanks for turning up today. Thanks for all your attention. Dave, did we have any questions come through at all?
Firstly, Trevor, I just want to thank you for putting out that information. We did have a couple of questions around the presentation and links, and they'll be sent out to all very shortly. I think what happens in most cases is the questions will come up when the board or committee decides to run their AGM, for example, or decides to do a board induction. So please keep in contact with Basketball Victoria. If you're in the regional area, that's your development offices or the country office, or contact the Metropolitan office for advice when you're about to do that. We'll also send out some links. There's some great information Trevor spoke about on Consumer Affairs Victoria. The regional sports assemblies in country Victoria have some great information. Vic Sport has some great information as well. So we will send those links out and this presentation to all. I'll just check the chat box one more time, and it's just again about the presentation. So that will be sent out. Just as we conclude, again, thank you, Trevor. It was a great presentation, putting that together. It's a very important part of our association's work. Reminder that this Thursday there'll be a Basketball Victoria Association meeting. An update went out last week, and I encourage associations who are on our call today, if you have clubs as part of your structure, to please send those Basketball Victoria updates onto your clubs, and more than welcome to have club representatives join us on Thursday morning. So that's about it from Basketball Victoria today. Trevor, once again, thank you, and we'll have more information about engagement sessions coming up shortly. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Remember, people, be kind, be safe, be careful.